Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And tonight we have a special treat from Fear Street, 1994 and 1666. Jeremy Ford is joining us. Jeremy, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. So good. Thank you for having me. And I feel like we're kind of talking at the right time. I mean, the third one came out and it's fresh right now.
It is. It is absolutely fresh. Peter and Caleb, 1994. You were Peter. Not the most likable dude. All right. In fact, I'm gonna call him a prick.
Yeah, spade a spade. He's a real scumbag.
Yeah, yeah. And then we go to 1666, where you played Caleb. Now, before we dive into Fear Street, I love to hear all my guests' journey into whether it's directing, writing, or acting in your case. When did you know you want to become an actor, and how did it all play out for you?
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. So many people that I've spent time with, actors and directors and stuff like that. So many of them, they knew it from the time that they could talk that they wanted to be a performer or a storyteller. I was like very much the opposite. Like I was a stupid, shy kid. I didn't want any sort of attention. I didn't want anyone to look at me. Didn't want anyone to talk to me. So acting was like not on my radar. I didn't grow up doing community theater or anything like that. I was very much just like a sort of average, shy, wallflower kind of kid. Got terrible grades in high school, so I knew I wasn't going to college. But I kind of graduated high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I knew I had big aspirations somewhere in me, but I guess I just didn't know what they were. But I was working at the mall when I was like 18, and I knew someone that sort of worked nearby at the mall. And she did like background acting, and she's like, "Oh, you should watch Pretty Little Liars tonight. I'm going to be on it." I grew up, kind of an hour outside of LA, but it's a completely different world out there. I didn't know anyone that had ever been on TV. I was like, "What are you talking about? That's the coolest thing I've ever heard." And she's like, "Oh, background acting. Like you should do that." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, dude, that's like way better than working at the Sunglass Hut. I'm gonna be a background actor." So I signed up to be a background actor with Central Casting in Burbank, and I was just commuting back and forth from Riverside, where I grew up, to do background acting jobs. And I fell in love with just being on set. I mean, the very first project I worked on was like one of those, procedural shows like NCIS or CSI or something like that. And it was on a soundstage in LA. And as soon as you walk on, man, it's electric, and everyone is like hustling, and everything is like buzzing. And I loved it. Like I loved being on a set. And I kind of hated background acting because you're kind of like treated like crap, kind of like bottom of the barrel. But I really love being on set. I'm like, I don't want to do this background acting thing, but I think I'm going to be an actor. And at this point, I'm like 19 years old, and I had never acted a day in my life, but I sort of like put my stake in that then and there. Like, I'm going to be an actor, and there's no looking back. Like that was it. And sure enough, here I am kind of like a decade later, and it's kind of random looking back on it, but yeah, that's kind of how I decided I wanted to act.
That's awesome, and it really is sort of not the norm that we hear from stories. I love your story. So when you put that stake, did you take any workshops or anything like that, or did you just dive into start auditioning?
Yeah, immediately my mom sort of told me about like a local acting class down sort of in like Temecula, which is like kind of South Riverside County. And it was a real sort of like beginner acting class, but I'm like, oh, if I'm going to be an actor, like I supposedly want to be, I guess I should probably learn how to act, And I was like a really like confident kid, I think I was like sort of overly confident, like a lot of 19-year-olds are. And I'm like, yeah, this
Cocky,
beginner
yeah, a
acting.
little cocky, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I showed up to this acting class first night, and, because I was new, it was like they put me up on stage, and it's like, okay, cool, time to let it rip, do a monologue, do a cold read of a monologue. And it was like just sheer cold sweats, panic immediately. I'm like, what am I doing up here? Like, this is so out of the norm for me. But it was great, because you quickly learn how hard acting is and how much of a challenge it's going to be to get half decent. But I liked the challenge, and I liked sort of like not being good at something because it gave me a goal. Like, it really gave me something concrete to pursue, And I did that acting class for a few months, and it was great because I got to like cut my teeth and just get up on stage every night and just work things and get comfortable. And then I feel like I kind of quickly outgrew that class. I met some really great friends in there, and we sort of like all buddied up, and we're like, you know what? Let's learn on the job. Let's write short films. Let's write movies. Let's make them ourselves.
Yeah.
So we just hit the ground running, like making our own stuff on no budget.
Now, I've heard a lot of actors say they have to get used to the camera. I mean, when you're taking a workshop and you're in front of a live audience, even if they're class members, classmates of yours, how different is it to get used to performing in front of a camera?
It's way different, and like maybe other people like latch on to that concept a little quicker than I did, but it took me like years to really understand like what it meant to like act for the camera.
Yeah.
Because you get a lot of bad advice early on. Early on, people are like, "Dude, just pretend like the camera's not there." That's the worst thing you could do if you want to be a film actor, you know. So early on, it was just kind of like, "Oh, here's the camera. I'm just gonna like act." All my energy was going away from the camera, and it shows, you know, like when you watch the movie or whatever it is, nothing is translating, and it took me a lot of years to learn how to like project all of your energy and emotion like to the lens. There's a bit of a learning curve for that, but it's totally different than just an acting class
Oh
where you're
yeah.
getting up on in front of your peers, you know.
All right. So now let's get into Fear Street. How did the process of auditioning come to you? Did your agent come to you and say, hey, there's this cool new Netflix thing coming together? Did you know what you were auditioning for, what role you were auditioning for? How did the whole audition process for Fear Street happen?
Yeah, it was brutal, and because I was like 19 when I decided I want to be an actor, and very quickly I sort of like got in touch with this talent manager who took me under her wing, and she started sending me out on auditions like kind of immediately. So in hindsight, I know how lucky I was to start auditioning almost like months after I decided I wanted to be an actor. And so fast forward from there, it was probably like 8 or 9 years of auditioning and doing all kinds of, just low budget, like very low paying stuff, non-paying stuff. It was, 8 years of,
Yeah,
I guess, paying your
paying
dues.
your dues.
Yeah. And then I found my way to this fantastic agent who I'm still with now. Her name's Brittany Stone, and she's the greatest. Shout out to Brittany if she's listening. And I was, bartending because that's what you do when you're in your 20s and you're trying to make it as an actor. And the Fear Street audition came my way, and you very quickly just learn like not to get your hopes up, especially about the big ones.
Yeah.
Like I've had a lot of like close brushes with like the quote unquote big break. Like I was up to be Han Solo. I was up for The Revenant. I was up for I was up for tons of big projects, but you just learn like, well, odds are not going to happen. So when Fear Street came my way, it was, Untitled at the time, 20th Century Fox horror trilogy. And of course I knew 20th Century Fox, major studio,
Hmm.
out of the gate. Cool, probably not going to get this, but I'm going to try my best. And I did the first audition, which was a self-tape audition, and I actually first auditioned for the role of Simon, who is now played by Fred Heckinger,
Hmm.
so wonderfully. And Carmen Cuba, the casting director, she's like, okay, I don't think you're right for Simon, but I think you'd be better to play this character named Peter, who is also Caleb.
Hmm.
At the time, I didn't know anything about the project, so I'm like, cool, whatever, sounds great. Yeah, I'm happy to have the second chance. So I started, all my callbacks were for the Peter Caleb characters, and it was about 6 weeks of just inching forward in the process, and my agent calling me saying like, okay, like Lee, the director, she likes you. She's going to go to bat for you. She's going to like talk to the studio execs and try to fight for you. And I'm like, dude, these studio execs, they're not going to like me. I'm a nobody. I've got no like decent credits. But huge credit to Lee and the studio execs, after like a brutal 6 week process, I finally got the call that I got it. And that was a wild day. I'll never forget that moment, actually.
How did you feel? I mean, how did you feel when you got the call that you got the part on Fear Street on the trilogy?
It's interesting because in those 6 weeks, I was experiencing like tons of like really elated excitement. And then the thought that it probably wasn't going to work out was like devastating. So I had this like roller coaster, like multiple times a day of being so stoked and then so bummed. So by the time I actually got it, it was more like I had exhausted all my excitement. It was more like, oh, like, thank God. Like I could stop checking my email every 20 seconds, It was more like a relief, like cool, like this 6 weeks of stress and anxiety paid off.
It's over. Now, credit to the studio. Fear Street, the entire trilogy, with the exception of Ashley Zuckerman, who is a name, they brought us some real amazing fresh faces, including yourself, onto this trilogy. I think that's a part of its success. They didn't go out and say, "Oh, we have to get this big name to make this work." They had faith in the story. Okay, they knew they had a good screenplay, a script. They had the right people with Lee directing it, and they brought us this fresh talent, and it's you guys that are the big factor on what made it so good. Now, with that being said, uh, all three movies, it is a trilogy. I assume they were all shot one right after the other. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, we shot them in 2019, so it was all pre-pandemic, which was obviously, in hindsight, a huge blessing. But yeah, we shot them all back to back to back. We shot 1994, and then we went straight to 1666, the third one, and then they went back and did 1978 last.
So there was no COVID disruptions. You guys were all done with all three movies before the onset of COVID.
Yeah, yeah, I think they officially wrapped 1978 in like the beginning of September, maybe it was the end of August, but 2019.
All right, so you were in 94 and you were in 1666. You said those two were done first. How much time did you spend on the set doing all your scenes and waiting around? How much time did you spend on the set?
I think for 1994, because I'm sort of scattered in the first half.
Hmm.
They were flying me back and forth because I had a lot of days off in between, and they just thought it was more efficient to just fly me back and forth. But 1994 is probably like a collective like 2 weeks of filming, and then 1666, because it's such a contained film, it's all like in that village, and every character is there in the background in every frame.
Hmm.
That was about 4 weeks straight of shooting in that village in the woods in Atlanta.
Where was the location, if you're able to share? Where was this thing filmed?
Yeah, 1994 was filmed kind of all over Atlanta, like different cities, like McDonough, like Peachtree Circle in Atlanta proper, and then 1666 was largely shot in Hampton, Georgia, which is I don't know, probably 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. But
Which
I
is a
mean,
huge
that
filming location now, Georgia.
oh yeah, dude. I mean, going to and from location every day, you're passing by like major sound stages, like oh, that's the Marvel sound stage, or oh, that's the Disney sound stage. It's wild.
It is, and it's amazing for me. I grew up in New York and L.A. back in the day. Those were it. That's where you saw. Walked through many sets in New York City. Same for L.A. You grew up in the L.A. area. I'm sure you passed through dozens of sets growing up. Now I gotta say, Fear Street has some of the freaking best. Has the one of the best soundtracks that I have heard in a long time. Now, uh, I was a teenager in the 90s. So, especially 94, the music that they played. Now, you're a lot younger than I am. Is this when you heard the music, when you watched the final product on Netflix and you heard all this great songs? Uh, Being a kid that was born in the 90s, how did that, what'd you think of that music and going back into the 90s?
Yeah, the music for the 90s, 1994, the soundtrack is impeccable. It's like the most 90s soundtrack one could fathom, you know? And I think Lee, our director, I think music was obviously such a big component for her, but I mean, her whole goal with 1994 was like to make the movie she wanted to make,
Hmm.
or make the movie she would want to see when she was in high school in the 90s. You
Yeah.
know, that was her whole. So she used all of her favorite music, the costume, the set deck, even like the stores in the mall at the beginning of 1994, the Orange Julius and the B Daltons, like they were so much like an homage to her childhood. So the music is just phenomenal. And same thing with 1978, being like on this side of it where, I try to, I'm producing my own movie right now, and knowing how expensive music is for movies, I'm watching these movies. All I can think of is like, oh my God, these songs are so expensive. It's incredible that they're using so many.
It is. It is. I mean, I remember watching 94 and we were texting with my team. I'm like, oh my God, look at this song. I mean, it brought back so many memories. So, me and Lee, I haven't met her yet, but we have the same taste in music. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, you
Now,
guys would vibe.
between 94 and 1666, obviously two different locations, two different sets. Which one did you have the most fun shooting? It's not, which one did you just have a little bit more fun with?
Yeah, definitely 1666, and that's largely because as an actor, it's kind of a cheat code because they built that like 17th century village out in the middle of the woods in Hampton, and that's where we were filming every single day. And the costume was so period appropriate, and it was so hot. It was summertime in Atlanta. It was humid, bugs everywhere. As an actor, I'm like, this is a cheat code. Like it's not even like you don't have to use your imagination
Yeah.
at all. And there were moments where we have like really long days, and it sounds hippy dippy, but there'd be moments where I'm like, oh wow, I feel like for a moment I actually believed I lived in the 17th century. You start to lose your mind a little bit, but I kind of dug it.
No, that's great. It gets you definitely into character. Now, a little bit more on Lee Janiak. She was the director. She's the one that really brought this to life. What was your experience working with Lee? How was she behind the camera and directing the actors? Was she really hands on? Did she get out of your guys' way and just let you do what you guys do? How was that?
Yeah, she was like you said, she's like responsible for the Fear Street trilogy. I mean, the studio took a huge swing because she was kind of a largely unknown filmmaker, but I think the studio saw something in her that we all see now that the movies are out. But I mean, these are her baby, these movies. Like every shred of like authenticity and self-awareness and excitement and fun came out of her brain, and ever since she like fought for me in the casting process and I'm a nobody, like I owe her like so much, like my heart really like belongs to her right now. But as a director, this was a major studio trilogy, and I showed up on set, and again, I showed up really confident because I'm a pretty confident guy, and just the size of the machine, there's 200 people every day. I was just immediately like, holy shit. I was like so overwhelmed. And like day one, I sort of like lost my cool and I got so nervous, but Lee was like so calm and cool and level headed. And she kind of like walked around with like a sucker in her mouth every day. And she's the type of director who, if she doesn't like what you're doing, she'll say it. She's like, hey, why are you doing that? No, don't do that. Just try something else. And then if she likes what you're doing, she'll go, yeah, more, do more of that. So she really lets you explore, and she'll kind of just guide you with like yeses and nos. And as an actor, it's kind of cool because I could just do my thing and let it rip, and she'll say yay or nay.
Now, would you classify yourself even before Fear Street as did you enjoy horror movies?
I in the last 5 years, with the emergence of movies like Get Out and Midsummer and Hereditary, I've grown to really like horror movies. Growing up, I didn't really like them. I was like a really easily scared child. But nowadays, like I do watch them with like reverence, and I think some of them are so well made, and there's a lot of heart, whether they're like campy and self-aware or whether they're like Midsummer. Like Midsummer's like a work of art in my opinion.
It's an artsy film, no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. So in the last like 5 or 6 years, I've really grown to enjoy horror films, even ones that are like older, like Signs or The Strangers.
Yeah.
Of course, Scream is obviously like a huge reference for Fear Street 1994. I love those movies.
Yeah. Now, Lee took some of the old school horror, the stuff like you said that probably scared you. She brought in elements of the paranormal, slasher flicks, a real throwback for lifelong horror fans like myself. What do you think separates Fear Street from other modern day horror movies that makes it so damn good, so interesting to watch, and you're just glued to the television and you want to see what happens next, and you can binge watch all three movies now back to back to back? What do you think separates Fear Street from other modern day horror movies?
Yeah, I feel like it's a couple things, and the one thing I keep touching on is like these three movies, all three of them, especially 1994 and 1978, they're very self-aware. Like Lee knew exactly what kind of movie she was making. She really struck a nice balance of like good, heartfelt drama and like in love, but as well as like she wasn't afraid to like have fun and like be poppy and be colorful. Like she knew what she was making, like I feel like some people don't understand self-aware movies. Like I think Scream is very self-aware. Like John Wick is sort of like the token self-aware movie everyone talks about, which is why people love it. Like Fear Street, you sit and Lee wasn't afraid to have a good time, and she didn't take herself too seriously. And I think that translates in the movies. Like they're fun, and 1994 is shot and it's made just like Scream
Yeah.
or I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's really elevated teen slasher horror. And 1978 pays huge homage to
The
Friday
Friday
the
the
13th.
13th.
Yeah, sleepaway camp and stuff like that. Like she knew what she was doing, and all the while she was having a good time. So, and I think that translates.
It
You
does.
know,
It does. Now, your castmates like Kiana, Benjamin, and of course Sadie, who is part of the Stranger Things universe. How did you guys all coalesce? Did you guys all get along right away? Was there a moment, a period of time of you guys getting to know each other? When you guys first met up on the set, was this an immediate, friendship formed? Describe that.
yeah. So I came on to 1994 a couple weeks after they started shooting, and at that point, all the 1994 cast like Kiana, Julia, Olivia, Fred, Benji, they were all really close and really tight knit. So I showed up like, oh man, I'm gonna be like the odd man out. Like I feel like the clique had already formed, but immediately like my day one on set, Fred came up to me. He's like, you're Peter, and he's like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And there wasn't like a shred of ego, like they were so quick to sort of adopt me into the inner circle. And everyone on this film, like from like Lee, like the producers, all the cast, everyone was like so cool and welcoming, and they're wonderful memories, and I'm going to look back on them fondly, I think, for a long time. But it was cool, and we were in Atlanta, and none of us like grew up there. Like we were all from New York, L.A., Vancouver.
Yeah.
They like I keep to myself a lot, but they were so cool to invite me, and we would pal around to like the movies, or we would go to the mall, or we would go to dinner. It was cool. Like I felt very comfortable and at home with them, and a lot of people aren't like that. A lot of people are either really cliquey or they have some version of a chip on their shoulder,
Yeah.
but that didn't exist on this set. Or if it did, they did a damn good job at hiding it.
That's great to hear. Now, your character in 1994, Peter, like you said, he was a scumbag, but it paid tribute to the 80s and 90s movies, the stereotypical school jock, of course, who had to pick and make fun of the nerdy kids, for lack of a better term. How did you get into the mindset of playing Peter in 1994?
Yeah, I try to be as serious as possible when it comes to like acting and my characters, and I knew you could just tell from reading the script, like I knew who Peter was, and I knew what purpose he served in the story. I mean, it's a really important purpose too. I think Peter sort of like reflects like how society was in
Oh, yeah.
1994.
Trust me,
Towards like
I was Peter's age in 94, so I could totally relate. Yeah.
yeah, especially like the attitude towards like a queer relationship, and that's the heart of the whole trilogy. It's it's a queer love story that
Mhm.
happens to take place in this cursed town in Ohio. And like back in '94, like the pretty cheerleader should have been with the asshole quarterback.
Mhm.
So that was the point Peter played, and being gay isn't new. Like people have been gay since time began, which is why in the 1600s, like the Sarah Fear, Hannah Miller
Yeah.
storyline, people were gay back then, and they were like completely like sidelined by society, and that's the point of like Caleb and Peter. So playing guys like that, I always want to play them truthfully and honestly, and people are always scumbags for a reason, and even though it's not said in the movies, for Peter, it's like the backstory I came up with him is like he had like a really aggressive dad that was like really hard on him, and his parents' marriage was probably in shambles, but like they stayed together because it was all about like keeping up with the Joneses, and like Peter's family like needed to be like the best family on the block, and they didn't want anyone to know that their family was falling apart, but their home life sucked, and I feel like Peter's dad was like really hard on him, so Peter had no control at home. So for me, the key to Peter was like Peter seeks control like in his like personal life and in his social circles, and for him control is like putting people down and being an asshole. Like that's what made him feel
Yeah.
like a handle in his own life, And that's usually the case with people that are sort of bullies, It
Yeah.
always stems from something.
And you're right. Peter is a very important character because the events of you following that school bus is sort of what starts to bring everything to the surface with the whole Sarah Fear story. Now, going to 1666, Caleb, a character very similar to Peter, 300 years in the past, a troublemaker. Again, you start the witch hunt in a way, by spreading the word and so on. What was it like to get into that mindset in the 17th century of what ultimately your actions lead to the hanging of Sarah Fear? I'm not saying that Caleb was solely responsible. He wasn't, but he was one of the characters that got the ball rolling on that.
Yeah, yeah. I really treated them like two different characters. It might not. They might look very similar on screen, but I guess the most helpful thing for me as an actor was like, okay, I was really overwhelmed at first, like taking on Peter and Caleb, and the thing that made me feel better was like I gotta treat them as two different people. Like I had to come up with like Peter's backstory and like figure out like why he is the way he is, and then separate from that, I had Caleb, and I mean they grew up in completely different societies because they're 300 years apart, and
Hmm.
for me, the key to Caleb, like the key to Peter, was like his abusive household. The key for Caleb was like early puritanical America, like that, like those early settlements, they were so driven by like religion. And to me, like there's nothing scarier than someone who uses religion in the wrong way or
Yeah.
who uses like religion to their advantage. And to me, that was Peter, or sorry, Caleb. Like, he gets embarrassed obviously around the fire. He has,
The boner.
yeah, and he gets laughed at and sort of like bullied, and as soon as he has a moment to get back at Sarah Fear and Hannah, he takes advantage of it, and he basically is the reason that Sarah Fear is known as like the witch to haunt Shadyside. Like the moment he can use religion in his favor and pitch Sarah Fear like under the wagon as a witch, he does it, and he is sort of like that linchpin where you've seen the movie, so you get it. Like Solomon Good is like, oh, I'm going to use this opportunity to my advantage, and like I'm going to help Caleb pin this whole curse on Sarah Fear.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a really important undertone in all three movies that no matter what the year, like you said, there have been gay people for as long as human beings have been walking the earth. But people are the same deep down inside. Caleb from 1666 used the methods and means that he had back then, as Peter did in 1994. Humanity, yeah, our mindset has changed, science has changed it on how we see things. Now, when it came to 1666, did you do any kind of research? Like, for instance, did you read more into the Salem witch trials to try to get some more background information of what it was like living in Puritan America back then?
I did because like studying to play Peter in 1994, it was so much easier because it wasn't that long ago, and
Mm-hmm.
there's so much at your disposal from that time period. The 1600s, I was a terrible student, as I already told you, and I was terrible in history, so I knew nothing about that time period in America. So luckily there's all kinds of like great documentaries on like the witch craze of like like the 1600s and stuff like that. So I just watched all kinds of documentaries. Like I read the play The Crucible, I watched the movie The
Mm-hmm.
Crucible, which I don't know how authentic that was, but it at least kind of helped paint the picture of like what it looked like back then. So yeah, I learned as much as I could about like the witch trial craze, and I mean it's wild. It's what you see in 1666 isn't a far cry from how it was. Like
No.
if anyone, especially like a woman, was like misbehaving or doing something that wasn't like kosher according to society, they were plagued as witches, and they were either like stoned or burned alive or hung or thrown into a river.
It's scary because that is not something that's made up for the movie. That shit actually really did happen, and it's terrifying to think about. Now, when it comes to the Fear Street movies, now for me, gore, like somebody getting their head chopped off or their head being put through a meat grinder, is fun to it's fun to watch. It doesn't scare me. For me, the scary part, the thriller part of it, was the psychological parts of Fear Street. Do you agree, as a so horror fan, when you were watching the final product, what got you the most? Was it like the blood, the amount of gore, or was it the psychological elements of the movies that got you? I mean, it might be different because you were there, you were filming it. But if you could remove yourself for a minute and just view it as a fan, what do you think is more scary, the psychological elements or the gore elements of the film?
I think I have a twofold answer. there's three moments in the trilogy. Each movie has one moment that gore wise is really next level. Like you said, like Kate going through the bread slicer is like, it's brutal. And one of the beautiful things about these movies is like they relied so heavily on like practical effects. Like they try to use as little CGI as possible. And as a movie lover, I'm all about that. And I think it's a lot, you get a lot more of a visceral reaction out of practical effects. And
I
they
agree.
actually, yeah, dude, they actually pushed like a dummy through the bread slicer and it really created a mess. So that moment, and then in 1978 at the end when, also this is a spoiler alert, when Cindy and Ziggy are getting like basically axed side by side on the ground. It's so visceral. You can almost feel it in your own chest cavity. And then in 1666 when Seraphira loses her hand, all three of those moments were so hard to watch for me, and they're burned into my mind forever. And I was involved with these movies, but it still was like that impactful for me. But second to that, I think what scares me most is like the sort of like B through line in these movies is sort of like the 400-year rule of like straight white men, and like the sort of like how they kind of get away with everything. I'm like, oh wow, that's actually how society has functioned for the last 300 or 400 years, and it's very sad.
It is.
You know, so psychologically that sucks.
It does. It does. Now, did you get the entire script when you got, when you came on set or beforehand? Did you know how this whole trilogy was going to end? If not, when did you find out? Including all the plot twists and, that amazing plot twist in the end of the trilogy.
Yeah, I had the fortune of, in that 6 weeks when I was like auditioning and like waiting to hear back, the night before they made an offer, they sent my agent the scripts, and they're like, okay, we want Jeremy to read them all tonight, and tomorrow let us know if he's interested.
Jeez,
and I'm like,
that's not a lot of pressure, reading 3 scripts in one night.
Yeah, but also I'm like, that's so funny that they think I wouldn't be interested, but like, sure, I'll play your cute little game, 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
So it was like a Tuesday night at like 7 p.m. when I got the scripts, and I locked myself in the bedroom and I read all of them like just back to back to back. And I got the full swing in like one fell swoop, which was actually like really special because I took the ride in one night. And some people might be watching the movies just like that, which is the coolest part about them being on Netflix. So I read them all back to back to back, and I got to go through the full roller coaster of, okay, they want me to play Peter. Okay, I'm reading the first one. Oh, page 40, Peter dies. I'm like, okay, obviously Peter's going to come back, right? And I get to the end, I'm like, oh, Peter's dead. So I had the full roller coaster of like learning when Peter died and when Caleb comes back. Luckily, Caleb makes it through the whole thing. But yeah, it was really cool reading the scripts like that.
So what did you think of the plot twist on how they did it with the movies? Did you, when you read the script, you're like, damn, this is some good shit right here. I mean, what were your thoughts when you read all 3 scripts in one night?
I mean, I didn't see it coming. So like, I didn't see it coming, but then you go back and like, I think I went back and I flipped to some like critical, like Nick Good moments. And I'm like, oh, it is peppered all through the 3 movies, but I didn't catch it. And I think of myself as something of like a smart movie watcher, but I was like, wow, they really did a good job putting the twist there, but like they buried it in such a way where I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
So I thought that was such a well done twist.
One of the great twists that I liked in the trilogy was in 1978 when they meet up with the adult Ziggy. We, throughout the whole movie, think it's her sister, and Ziggy died. And that twist in the end, like, oh no, you're Ziggy. I think that's one of the greatest twists. What do you think about that?
Yeah. You know what? Reading it, I think somehow going into it, I already knew that somehow. I think because at the first page of each script, it says like in 1978 who the characters are from 1994 and who they're going to be in 1666. So they kind of spoiled it in that way in the script. But watching it, because in the last 3 weeks with all the premieres, I watched them all like 1 week apart, like everybody has. And I with the audience, because Netflix held these like really wonderful premieres for us, and watching it with an audience, you could feel every scare, you could feel every comedic beat, you could feel every twist, and feeling everyone go, I was like, oh shit, that's right. Like I forgot that was a twist, but the whole sea of people behind me reacting, I was like, oh cool. Like I dug that.
I've heard that so many times that actors they would prefer to see the final product not alone but in a theater just to engage what the audience around them is feeling. So obviously it was the same way for you too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I as an actor, like I struggle to watch my stuff because I'm so hypercritical. So if I have the opportunity, I always
Same
like
here
try to
too.
watch. Yeah, right. Like
I will
I
never
was,
watch this episode again.
yeah, you know, I mean, you're doing a great job, so there's no need for FYI. But if I have an opportunity to watch it alone ahead of time, I'll take it because I just need to know what I'm getting myself into. You know, like sometimes like in projects like you get cut out, and if you're watching it for the first time with an audience and you're experiencing with an audience that like, oh, you're not in it as much as you thought,
Hmm.
that's brutal. And that's happened to me before with a couple things like where I've been cut out. I'm like, oh, wait, I was supposed to be there a couple seconds ago. Now we're already moving forward in the plot. Like, what happened? That's devastating. So I try to watch it alone ahead of time just to know what I'm getting myself into. But when it comes time to watch it with an audience, it is great to experience every like sort of like laugh and every thrill with like a mob of people.
Yes, yes, I can imagine that. Now, what do you think about this format? I don't think it's ever been done before where a trilogy of three separate movies are released a week apart on a streaming service, the biggest streaming service, Netflix. Do you like that format? I think it's ingenious. Do you like how they did that? The release dates, 1 week apart.
I think it was the smartest thing they could have done. I mean, when I first signed on to these projects, like you know, it was 20th century, and this is 2019, pre-pandemic. Theaters were still like hustling and bustling, and the original plan that 20th Century came up with was we're going to release them all in theaters 1 month apart. So it was kind of a little bit different than how Netflix did it, but it was still like they were still trying to be innovative, like from the start. And I thought that was really cool. You know, I'm like, oh, these movies are going to be in theaters. That's exciting. All 1 month apart. Wow, that's pretty edgy. And then the pandemic hit, and Netflix showed like huge interest in the Fear Street movies. And when Netflix acquired them, I was like, oh wow, like because Fear Street bears such a strong resemblance to Stranger Things, I'm like, Netflix is like the perfect home for Fear Street. And then they announced that they're going to do it 1 week apart, and it was kind of like I think we all felt like it was the sort of dream scenario coming true. And now that we're out of the woods and all three of them are out now, and so far they've all been like very well received. It's like yeah, it's been the best case scenario.
I think it was ingenious. Netflix, you could say, might argue that they took a risk. I think it's a risk that definitely paid off. Now, the people who were not watching it as they were released and are watching it now can literally sit and binge watch like 7 hours worth of a movie back to back to back and just have a thoroughly enjoyable experience. Were there any scenes that you were on set for that you filmed, like your death scene in '94 in the hospital, that when you saw the final product kind of grossed you out a bit?
Uh, the death scene was actually that was day one for me was my death scene.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like I had like no time to really like wrap my head around like I show up and it's like a huge thing and it's like my first studio trilogy and I'm so excited and literally immediately I just get stabbed in the chest. Um, but that was cool, and the only thing I watch and sort of like shudder at is like just the taste of the corn syrup in my mouth because Peter spits blood after
Hmm.
he gets stabbed. I had a styrofoam cup full of blood that I kept having to like sip on all day long in order to spit out. And every time I watch myself get stabbed, my mouth starts to water in a bad way, remembering the way that corn syrup tastes. But definitely, I wasn't there for Julia's character Kate going through the bread slicer, but watching that one, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh yikes! Like, what sick freak came up with this?
Exactly. Now, out of all of the Nick Goods and the Good family killers that they put their names on the stone throughout the years, which one did you, as a fan watching the final product, did you enjoy the most? I'll tell you mine. I liked Ruby.
Yeah, yeah, Ruby was fun, especially all of her interactions with the Simon character,
Yeah,
and
Ruby
just the
was
way.
creepy.
Yeah, I will say I might be biased because I like McCabe Sly so much, the actor, but I think Tommy Slater is my favorite,
Oh, from
just because he is from '78. He
yeah,
was just a ruthless axe murderer who was just dead in the eyes, and he literally killed children. And it's like it's the gnarliest thing I've seen.
Yeah, and he would run and, with the axe. And watching 78, because we saw him in 94 as the killer, then we got his story in 78. And it wasn't until the very end that he got that burlap sack put over his head. So I'm watching
Yeah.
78 and I'm like, when does this sack come into play? And then we see that it comes into play right at the very end. Now, these movies are based on R.L. Stein's books. Did you refer to the books? Did you read any of the books when you got the part before you auditioned? Now, after the movies are out, have you read the source material at all?
As soon as I came onto the projects, I was like, oh, these Fear Street books, I gotta get in the know, because talking to like a lot of my friends that are like of my generation, so many people I know like read the Fear Street books and they grew up on R.L. Stein. And again, I was a total chicken when I was a kid, so I didn't read them. I'm like, I got to hop on this train. A lot of people really like these things. And I bought a couple of Fear Street books on Amazon immediately. And the cover art is so cool and so timeless. I'm like, I got to read them. And I got them in the mail. I'm like, oh, you know what? I feel like as an actor, anything to inform my performance that's important, I think it's either going to come from the script or it's going to come from Lee Janiak.
Yeah.
And I definitely didn't want to be the guy on set. Like, actually, in the book, it's done this way because nobody likes that guy. And I'm embarrassed to say they're sitting on my shelf over there, and I haven't read them yet.
That's all right.
But
That's all right. That's all right. Now, throughout this whole project, what would you say was the most challenging thing for you to do as an actor?
That's a good question. I feel like because the movies are they're so fast paced and they're so technical, and like I said, a lot of the stunts and the deaths are done practically. And I've done so many like really just like fantastic but like low budget projects that I'm super proud of. But a lot of the low budget indies, it's sort of like they light it and they set the camera up and they're just like, okay, cool, like just be your character, just do the lines, just live, just be honest. And that's a lot easier as an actor. Just, you can kind of just let it fly and the camera will follow you. But with the Fear Street trilogy, everything was like so laid out to a T. It was like you have to be memorized, you have to be honest, you have to show up and give a good performance. But on top of that, it's like you have so many technical beats and technical notes you're given. It's like you have to say it at this pace and at this time. Watch out for the camera because the camera's going to come behind you. And then the curtain's going to drop. Then you're going to get stabbed. Then you have to fall to the floor. And then be sure you don't do any of that too fast, but don't be too slow. It's like such a technical beast. It was really hard. Like especially like the first week, I really struggled with like all these technical notes, and I would lay in bed at night like, oh my God, like I feel like I'm making an ass out of myself because I feel like I was like catching up with like the jargon and the speed at which we moved. But after the first week, I feel like I sort of got the hang of it, and in those 6 or 7 weeks it took me to make 94 and 66. I feel like I learned and I grew so much as an actor. I feel like I learned more than in the last decade, to be honest.
If we fast forward 5-10 years from now, do you have any doubt in your mind that you're going to look back and say that the Fear Street trilogy was your biggest break?
Oh, no doubt. Like, absolutely. It felt like I went from like the bottom rung of the ladder, it feels, to like the middle. And even like my agent and my manager, when I booked it, they were like, yeah, just so you know, like this day and age, studios don't take swings on like up and coming talent. Like this is very special. And so out of the gate, I sort of had an awareness like, okay, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And even still 2 years later, I know that to be true.
Now that the movies are out, and like you said, critically acclaimed, everyone loves them. The critics love them. The viewers love them. Have you been offered or you're auditioning for, has it given you the confidence to go for roles that you before would not normally go for?
Yeah, I think it's done a lot for my confidence. But even before Fear Street came out, it afforded me like opportunities that I wouldn't have had before. And just to touch on that a little bit more, when the pandemic hit, my career was like, it felt like on a roll. I did the 2 Fear Street movies in 2019. At the beginning of 2020, I booked a role in the Apple TV show Mosquito Coast, and it was just a small role, but it still felt like things were happening. And I was in Mexico shooting, and then like COVID happened, and the world sort of shut down. I was like, oh, of course, it's just my luck. Like as soon as things start to pan out for me, the world shuts down.
Yeah.
But my wife and I were like, okay, let's just put our heads together. Let's write a script just to like fill the free time. And it sort of started as like a fun thing we're going to do. And the lockdown just kept going forever. And we ended up writing a script that we're like super proud of. And we ended up getting it financed by like two lovely financiers. And I think a big part of them trusting us and trusting me was, Fear Street being under my belt and the fact that I play a pretty good part in this, giant studio trilogy.
Yeah.
They were more inclined to trust the project and trust the material. And I don't think that would have happened without Fear Street.
No, no, I totally agree. Now you have an upcoming credit that's in pre-production called Way Down Bundy. Is that sort of related to the Ted Bundy theme type movie? What's that about? If you could share.
No, that's the project I'm talking about that I wrote with my wife.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're actually officially in pre-production on that now. And we got financed at the beginning of the year. And then once that happened, we started assembling the team, like all of a sudden we're like making like an actual movie, which I don't think we really anticipated happening. And we hired a couple fantastic producers to help co-produce. And now we have a great director. We have a great DP, a casting director. We're going through casting right now, and we're filling out the talent. And I wish I could tell you.
No, no, I don't. I totally get it. We have to wait. I totally get it. But where does writing sit in your heart as compared with acting? Obviously, you're a very talented actor. Where does writing have its place in your heart?
It's definitely second to acting. Like I love acting so much, and I sort of check myself on that like once a year because living in LA, and I'm sure a lot of like New York people are like this too. So many people move here to pursue acting, but like they don't actually like acting. Like they want to be actors, but they don't like acting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
I feel like, especially like, bartending for all those years, I was surrounded by so many people that didn't seem like they actually like loved it. So kind of once a year, I check myself like, okay, do I actually like acting, or do I just want to be an actor? And every year I come up with the same answer. It's like, okay, I actually do love acting, which is why I've been struggling for it for a decade, And writing just kind of was something I did to, fill the time. I've written like 3 feature film scripts just sort of like out of necessity and out of like, I come up with an idea and I sit down and start writing. And I love writing. And, I feel like I'm half decent at it because I put so much practice in at it, but it's almost like a necessity. It's just something I do as like another creative outlet. It almost feels more like a hobby, where acting is like my 100%, all hands on deck day job.
Yeah, I totally respect that though, making your own opportunities. Even when COVID was shut down, you did not just sit around on the couch waiting for it to be over. You did something productive, and that totally earns my respect. Now, having done horror, do you want to do more horror moving forward, acting wise? Did you find a new appreciation for horror that you would definitely not turn? I mean, most actors wouldn't turn down a paying gig anyway, but are you interested in doing more horror work going, forward in your career?
I liked acting in the Fear Street movies. It was the first sort of like bout I had with horror films. And when you're making it, it doesn't feel like any different than making like a drama, but it's really high stakes drama. Like every moment is like life or death. And as an actor, it's sort of like, that's like our bread and butter. Like every actor I know like would love to have like a really fantastic death on camera, So I enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun. And like I said, like acting in such high stakes like that every day, it's exhausting. And every day I went home with a gnarly headache, but I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I would love to do it again.
Would you be interested down the line sometime, maybe writing horror? You think you'd want to take a stab at that? Sorry for the pun.
Yeah, I feel like I've brainstormed a few like horror ideas, and I feel like every one I've come up with so far feels like really cheesy or like been done before. But I get the ideas, which makes me think one day like one of them's going to stick, and I'm actually going to take a stab at it.
I would love to. I would love to see that. I think you would be really, really good. Now, if you were able to describe your role to Fear Street, what was it like? How would you describe Peter to, let's say you meet somebody or a friend who hasn't watched Fear Street yet, and you're like, and they ask you, well, who do you play? how would you best describe Peter in 1994? Besides being a scumbag or a total bully, uh, we know that bullies are bullies because they have their own insecurities. Did you build any kind of a backstory into Peter as to why he's a bully? Is he insecure? He's dating Sam. What kind of backstory? How would you describe your character?
Yeah, I feel like I've had a lot of practice describing Peter to people because everyone finds out like, oh, you're in the Future movies. Who do you play? And I always say like, yeah, I play a character named Peter who is he's the prototypical high school hotshot, but he is sort of like the mirror of what society was at that time. And I do it like every time I book any sort of like job, the first thing I do, aside from like just memorizing the lines, is I journal in character. I buy a separate journal and I label it with the character's name. And it sounds really kind of cheesy and maybe hippie dippy, but I always journal from like the character's perspective, from like the character's earliest memory up until like present day, whatever present day is in the script. And it's kind of crazy. It feels sort of silly, but it's the fastest way to like sort of fabricate memories. Like sometimes you actually feel like you have created like a character with real memories, which as an actor, that's sort of the goal. So for Peter, it was sort of like, his family name, which is like Brody, in Shadyside, like the family name means a lot, like maybe it's like the name of the dad's company and it's like, oh, the Brody family, maybe their history goes all the way back to, 17th century Union, Ohio, before it was Shadyside. And it's like, oh, there's a family legacy there. And Peter simultaneously like kind of loathes his dad for being so hard on him, but he also like leans into the family name because it like gets him somewhere. He's Peter, he's a hot shot. So he has this duality of like sort of like hating his family, but like leaning on the name to get him where he wants to be. So I thought that was a sort of very helpful thing to explain the way he is.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you this last question. Playing two different characters in the same trilogy, did you discover stuff about? Did your acting go to a level that you did not know was there before? Having to portray Caleb in 1666, Peter in 1994. I know you said, like a lot of actors, we are our own worst critics, when it comes to our work. Did you find yourself that you discovered a level of yourself that you did not know was there before?
With 1666, there's that big pivotal scene where Caleb gets up on the pulpit in the church and he basically fabricates the story, which throws Sarah Fear and Hannah Miller under the bus, and he basically calls them out to be the witches and why like the town is cursed. That was a very big moment for me as an actor because there's all the actors, all the extras. There's maybe 100 or so people in the church as well as the 200 crew members milling around, and most of the day was like delivering that monologue because it's such a big moment. And weeks leading up to that, I'm like, okay, there's that big moment. And I worked so hard on it, but I knew I would get up there and immediately be nervous at the very least. But when I got up there, like I found I was actually like way more excited than I was nervous. And like, I did that monologue probably 20 or 30 times that day. And when it was all said and done, it was like a really long day. I remember that day in particular was like 15 or 16 hours. And when it was all said and done, man, I just wanted to keep going. I wanted to do more. And it was another one of those validating moments where I'm like, okay, good. Like I do like this acting thing. Like I love it. And in fact, like I want to act until the day I die, dude. Like
that's awesome.
Vacationing is great, but if I could work every day on set, I would.
I had one actor tell me, this, I forget who it was, but he has a lifetime. He has nothing left to prove. And I go to him, have you ever thought about, retiring? And he said something to me that stuck with me. Retiring from acting would be like asking me to stop breathing. And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuck with me. Now, final question. I know I said that before, but being on such a big budget, like trilogy, like Fear Street, now the next project that you were on or going to be on, are you afraid that, man, you're going to be a little bit underwhelmed, being spoiled with seeing a big production like Fear Street? Are you afraid of being a little bit underwhelmed for your next project?
Yes and no. Yes, because how could you not be after like such a gigantic beast, you
Yeah.
know? But no, because the next project I'm doing is Way Down Bundy, the one I'm producing and wrote, and I'm the sole reason it's an underwhelming experience because it's a much smaller film. So I only have myself to blame.
All right. Jeremy, it's been absolutely great talking to you. I can't believe this hour just flew by. You were great in Fear Street. The trilogy is amazing. For anybody, if you have not watched it yet, please go to Netflix, check out Fear Street 1994, Fear Street 1978, and the finale, Fear Street 1666. I guarantee you, if you start 1994, you're more than likely going to be in front of that TV for the next 7 hours, watching all three of them in a row. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts you want to share with your fans or our audience?
No, I just want to say I really appreciate the outpouring of love that I've been getting on social media, considering I play guys that are like not the greatest. People have been really nice on Instagram, and I appreciate all the really kind DMs. And to second what you said, if you guys haven't watched Fear Street yet, I promise it's a very good time, and they're very enjoyable movies, and they're important because it's a studio taking a big swing on a queer love story, and I think we
Yeah,
need more of those.
absolutely. And remember, if you play an antagonist and people start to lash out at you, it means you did a great job at your role. Always remember that.
I appreciate that.
Anyway, thank you to Jeremy. Thank you to all our viewers. I hope you enjoyed this hour as much as we did. Until next time, guys, on behalf of Jeremy and myself, stay safe, stay walking. Good night.